much. Yes, my name is Frédéric Donck, and I'm heading the European Regional Bureau of the Internet Society. We're based in Brussels. Just for you to know, we have 5 bureaus in the world. One of them is in Europe. We help achieving the objective of the Internet Society at regional and local level, hence our engagement with all sorts of stakeholders, the technical community, which is an important part for us, but also governments, European institutions, businesses, academic, civil society. I'm also glad to say that the Bureau succeeded to hire recently a new colleague, Marit Paloveta. If you can just stand up. She will be more often here than I will be, so I would invite to turn to her, and she will help me focusing on Eastern countries, including Russia. So, my plan actually was to talk you through some critical internet issues in Europe. I won't be able to get through all of them. I pick up network neutrality and also DNS blocking. And then I just realized that I might also talk a little bit of a recent decision of the European Court of Justice on what we call the Spanish Google case. I don't know who is familiar with this case. Could you please raise your hand if you heard about that, Google? Yes, I see some hands. I might be just giving you some hints about that because it might be a very important case in Europe and precedent set by the European Court of Justice. So let's see how long we take with the 2 previous topics. I might go fairly quickly through DNS blocking because my slides, which by the way are posted on this on the Enog website, are self-explanatory, I hope, so you might refer to them. So let's start with those critical internet resources. So I should go here. How does it work? Yeah, network neutrality. So normally I always start my presentation with the internet model and how the internet works and the principles. Well, I guess it won't be useful for this audience. You all know what we're talking about, but trust me, in some places I really need to come back on the very strong principles underlying the internet: transparency, open technical standards, mentioning the IETF, no central control, no, well, shared global ownership, nobody owns the internet. So we sometimes have to repeat and repeat again, especially when we meet governments and institutions. Also, some key characteristics that are important to discuss in the overall network neutrality conversation that would indeed be the best effort. And that is something that worked quite well so far, but you will see why I'm mentioning this. And of course, the innovation without permission, which is again a very interesting concept for the internet. And I guess somebody mentioned it during those 2 days, but during the Net Mundial, people came back on this. What is it really that it means, permissionless innovation? So the origin of the debate started in the US, then spreading all over the place, certainly in Europe, came naturally by an increase in demand for internet connection with greater bandwidth. So there were indeed more pressure on the network capacity, and then greater use of congestion management and traffic shaping. So actually the key question that came up was, well, is traffic management a threat to the open architecture of the internet? At the very beginning of the debate, we at the Internet Society were fairly uncomfortable with the terminology network neutrality because we saw that as a kind of very broad term. Each time you get into a room and pronounce this name, people will just think of freedom of expression, user choice, traffic management, pricing, discrimination. A lot of different concepts came in. So we thought we would concentrate on a more defined terminology, open internet. Well, we didn't succeed well. People continue to refer to network neutrality. Well, at least those time I believe that we're quite clear than when you address this. It's more about traffic management, and as you will see in a few seconds, there were a shift in the conversation towards maybe specialized services. So I believe no people exactly know what they're talking about. But we also, and again, came back to, well, our user-centric vision of the internet, and this is the definition that I gave in blue. Users expect an internet in which traffic is conveyed in a manner that is agnostic to source, content, and destination. What is linked to this is certainly that for us, the key enablers were access, choice, transparency, and I would even add competition. We might see at a later stage that, well, at the end of the day, competition, choice, and transparency might not solve everything. So there might be some role for regulators, but I come back on this in a few seconds. So yes, also, and again, it was fairly important for us to recall government that we need to talk about the internet, right? I mean, they should not be confusing between an IP-based services or something using IP protocol instead of the internet. So we're happy to see that there are many services that using IP, but that is not the global internet. So we need to make sure that people understand the difference between the global internet and IP-based services. And of course, this should be made clear to customers. I remember seeing in France some ad saying that is the internet when it was just about some IP services. So it's really important. So we tried to come up with, I wouldn't call it a definition. It was just a kind of framework, an approach to try to help actually say what the internet or what principles are key for us. Of course, non-discrimination is here by definition. Networks should just move bits. That's all what we ask them to do. Difference to the IP-based services, which we also call them specialized services, is that, they are built using IP, but they operate with a restricted set of networks, or sometimes only one network. This is voice over broadband that, for example, BT is using in UK. You just can call another users of BT to make calls over broadband. That's it. This is not the global internet. Again, internet-based service application, I just wanted to come back on this. Skype is a typical example of an internet-based online communications application versus what I just described with voice over broadband offered by some telcos. And again, it's just to make clear that people are talking the same language and that they know what they're talking about. There has been in the past some great confusion at government level for sure. 10 minutes left? Jesus. So I will have to speed up, I'm afraid. Traffic management, actually the key issue for people was traffic management. We very early said that traffic management per se was not an issue. We all understand that congestion is a natural consequence of the internet design, but of course any traffic management should be done in a way that remain application neutral, transparent, and of course anti-competitive. Adding that this is not the panacea. I mean, adding capacity to network is also a very valuable solution to just alleviate congestion. Comparison, well, I quite like this, although it's not completely accurate to just take it, but it's a bit provocative. What would you say if your electricity provider would just price you differently if you use the heat in your kitchen or the light in your bathroom? You would not like this at all. Well, I wanted to just rapidly go through this one, and this is the European Commission then start doing what they do best. This is regulating. So they are policymakers, so they just came up saying that they would have to deal with those issues, and they came up with strong principles. We could be happy with what they say, and users shall be free to access and distribute information and content, run application, and use services of their choice, and the prohibition of blocking, slowing down, degrading, etc. So yes, at the very beginning, many people were happy to see those overall definition. There were exceptions, and this is where we start being a bit worried, because in the exception, they were saying that There could be reasonable traffic management measures, but there were no specific definition on what reasonable was, hence a bit of a concern. And then secondly, and this is where the whole debate shifts, telcos actually wanted the commissions to insert and integrate a definition of specialized services. Nobody asked them. Which is interesting is that currently ISPs and telcos might actually go and enter into deals with specialist services, with content providers. Nobody and nothing impeded them to do so, but they wanted to be just enshrined in the legislation. And actually, this is where the whole fuss started in Europe, because people went then a bit worried about, okay, how would both services, the global internet and specialized services, coexist, especially on the same physical line? So would the best effort become the least effort internet? That is, to me, the critical question. And then the other big guys, European Parliament, came in on April 3, and again, the reason why I'm describing this is to show you how we escalate in Europe the case and where we are right now. So they actually strengthened completely the concept of network neutrality. There were very hot and heated debates in Brussels. Finally, they came up with a very strong view on how network neutrality should be regulated in Europe, especially with specialized services, where they're saying that network capacity should be sufficient to provide specialized services in addition to internet access services. So it was a response to those who were worried that the coexistence of both services would be to the detriment of the global internet. So that is really a very strong statement. And also they came up with, and again I will go a bit quickly on this one, you will see that on my slides, but again they said that the NRAs, the national regulatory authorities, should monitor, which is indeed an interesting stuff, because the third big guy is the BEREC. Those are the national regulatory authorities, the regulators in each country, which have their own body, which is called the BEREC. And they made a quite interesting findings recently. I would invite you to check, if you're interested, this report of March, in which they were saying that, yes, we can do it. We are the regulators. We can check this. We will evaluate the performance of internet access service as a whole. Quite clever, because they were specifically saying that they should not only monitor the most known websites and part of the internet, so they should go to diverse destinations. And the good news is that they often refer to the IATF as just a good source or an excellent source of technical expertise. Last but not least, the US situation is not an easy one either, and that comes to complicate a bit the whole conversation, because every people now look at the US and the FCC. You might remember that there were a time where the FCC came up with fairly good advice on how they should handle, and then banks in January, the Court of Appeal just limited the right of the FCC to deal with DSL and broadband providers. And actually it has been misinterpreted by many people. What the Court of Appeal said was that the FCC would not be institutionally able to deal with those because of, and you need to step back in '96, there was a US Communication Act making a distinction between common carriers, telephony, and broadband carriers, and the FCC could only deal with those common carriers. And then, of course, there was the Comcast-Netflix deal, and many people again interpreted this, saying, this is the end of network neutrality. The next one will be Apple, will be whoever, and this is the end of the network neutrality, because it will allow ISPs to force content providers to go into specific deals with them. So very, very, very recently, a few days ago, the FCC said that they will nevertheless monitor all of this, and they will open for consultation just to see whether broadband and internet services should be considered a public utility. I'm also quoting what Zeya and Tim Wu, the father of the network neutrality concept, who were asking the FCC to consider the last mile as a telecom just to allow again the FCC to deal with those issues. So the conclusion for here is, yes, in Europe, at least in this part of the world, European Union, there is a great polarization of the debate, and this still is. We are in the middle of many votes right now. You know that there were elections in the European Parliament 2 days ago. We still need to digest this to see how will this assembly be constituted. I've seen already that some people who were really supporting network neutrality won't be there anymore, so that might be worrying. The European Parliament is a co-legislator, meaning that they will have to contribute to the next step with member states, and we heard already that member states, Germany and other countries, were already saying that they would like to soften a little bit the network neutrality principles that the European Parliament has established. So we will get into a very, again, hot debate at institutional level soon. Let's not forget the role of the BEREC. They, again, a few days ago issued a comment on the European Parliament vote and the situation where they recall that at the end of the day, they should be given principles, no more. Don't try, you guys in the policy world, to just put your hands into too many details. Regulators should be able to manage this. With the stance that the BEREC have taken so far, I feel this is a good point. And then there is still the influence of the US debate. I see that I've been instructed to terminate in less than 5 minutes. So I might not address DNS blocking again. Please refer to my slide. I would like to talk you through very rapidly on this famous, quote unquote, Google case. So it's about the right to be forgotten. And well, this is interesting. So there were a Spanish citizen, Mr. Gonzalez, or I don't remember his name, who wanted his name precisely to be removed from some information on the net. He had problems in late 2000 when he had to sell his house due to problems, business problems, an auction for his house to reimburse debt, and he no longer wants this to be something on the internet. So what he did, he asked Google to remove his name from Google search engine. So Google refused. He just addressed the case with the Spanish court, and the Spanish court, and this is something you might not be familiar with, but the Spanish court, when there is something that might have an impact on the European market, has to refer at a higher level, and that would be the European Court of Justice. So you see the escalation, and the European Court of Justice has just taken a decision a few days ago. Well, ironically, this poor Mr. Whatever his name, who wanted to remain discreet, is now known all over the world because of this case. So in short, what the Court of Justice said is that Google is a data controller, meaning that Google is responsible not only as an intermediary, but as a data controller. So they should give the right to people to see some data being removed not from the internet. The data are still on the internet, but removed from search engines, which is a clear precedent. We still try to digest this case. The Court of Justice tried to come up with a balanced approach, saying that yes, national courts would have to clearly see whether the information are not relevant or not true, and the impact on the life of the persons who ask for them to be removed, and also to check and balance with the necessity that some information need to remain on as a public information. Yet there were many people who were extremely worried that this case is something about censorship or private censorship. So there is a clear balance here between privacy and your right to manage your own data and censorship or other human rights. So we still will have to digest this case, see how Google will handle this. I understand that it might be cumbersome. I mean, we just don't know whether if the person in question in Spain asks Google to remove those information, it will be for google.es or google.com at worldwide level, or whether people outside of Europe might access information that people inside of Europe might no longer be able to access. Well, the right to be forgotten is a quite of interesting concept. Initially, it was a French definition, le droit à l'oubli, by French policymakers, hence it's fairly complicated. But technically, we have some issues, and we try to make sure that policymakers understand that the internet doesn't forget anything, and that technically it might prove cumbersome. So with that in mind, I guess that I came to the end. I'm open for questions, and certainly I'm open for any reaction from your side, because the objective from this presentation was for us, and me in particular, to better understand what's your feeling on all those many issues. Thank you very much.
Коллеги. Значит ли это, что вопрос?
Colleagues, does that mean that you have no questions? No, we do have questions. Excellent. Please don't forget to introduce yourself. My name is Gennady Abramov. I'm from Links Telecommunications CIS.
About network neutrality and what do you call on US slide, and I think that's usually a common concept that moving on the internet service should not escape the regulator. So as you understand, there are a lot of services that move to the internet to escape the regulator, and for example torrents. And so how to keep the neutrality and the same conditions for all services, and in the same time to keep inside the concept that service should not escape regulator from by migrating to internet.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's a very good question that actually, and you're right to say that it's fairly US, because in the US you have this Communication Act making distinction between DSL broadband carriers on one hand and common carriers on the other hand. So yes, there were a temptation in the US to say that even if you're Verizon and telecom, moving to IP might just make you sure that you escape regulation and network neutrality for the FCC. So it's fairly typical US-centric here, and you're right to mention it, because in Europe we just are actually in another situation which is driven by competition. So actually services are basing from what they are. They provide a service, and electronic communication globally describe whatever might happen from telecoms to the internet to whatever service which is electronic by nature. So you're right to say that this is specifically US here.
Okay, I understand. I just misunderstood the concept initially.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Коллеги.
Colleagues, any other questions, please? No. Not as far as I can see. Well, thank you very much.